It wasn't the flash of the camera bulbs that blinded her, but the casual cruelty in her husband's eyes. One moment, Letitia Davenport was the pregnant, glowing wife of a millionaire standing on the red carpet of New York's most prestigious charity ball. The next, she was the punchline to a joke he whispered to his friends, a joke about her dress, her body, her very existence. She thought that was the worst it could get. She was wrong. The true betrayal wasn't the public humiliation, but the private one that would follow a secret rendezvous captured in a single photograph that would shatter her gilded cage and force her to discover a strength she never knew she possessed. The air in the penthouse overlooking Central Park was thick with the scent of lilies and expensive perfume. Letitia Davenport, 7 months pregnant, and feeling as expansive as the view from their floor-to-ceiling windows, stood before the antique gilt mirror, turning slowly. The dress was a deep emerald satin, custom-made by a designer whose name was whispered in reverent tones on Madison Avenue. It was designed to celebrate, not conceal, the swell of her belly, cascading from an empire waist in a fluid line to the floor. She thought she looked beautiful, like a queen from a forgotten era, carrying the future heir to the Davenport real estate empire. Her husband, Timothy Davenport, strode into the dressing room, adjusting the diamond cufflinks on his bespoke tuxedo. At 40, he was the picture of success, sharp jaw eyes the color of cold steel, and an aura of supreme confidence that bent rooms to his will. He had built his company, Davenport Properties, from the ground up, and he never let anyone, especially Letitia, forget it. He glanced at her reflection, his lips thinning into a tight, unimpressed line. "Is that what you're wearing?" Letitia's smile faltered. "Yes. Donatella designed it herself. She said it was regal." She placed a hand on her belly, where their daughter, who she had already secretly named Anya, was kicking softly. "It's a tent, Letitia," he said, not unkindly, but with a clinical dismissiveness that was far worse. He walked over not to embrace her, but to pluck an imaginary piece of lint from his shoulder. A very expensive, very green tent. The joy she'd felt moments before deflated, leaving a familiar hollow ache. This was Timothy's way. He built her up with lavish gifts and a lifestyle that was the envy of everyone they knew, only to tear her down with a single, well-aimed comment. She was a possession, a beautiful ornament to be displayed, and tonight she felt she was failing inspection. I thought it was elegant," she murmured, her voice small. "It's a lot of fabric," he conceded, turning his attention back to his own perfect reflection. "Let's just hope you don't get mistaken for the new curtains at the venue. The Metropolitan Children's Fund Gala is all about image. You know that." She did know. Their entire life was about image. Their marriage, their friendships, their public appearances, all were meticulously curated for the pages of society magazines and the approval of New York's elite. Timothy was a master of the game. Letitia, an artist by training with a gentle soul and a trust fund she rarely thought about, was merely a player often forgetting her lines. The ride downtown in the back of the chauffeured Bentley was silent. Letitia stared out at the glittering lights of the city, feeling a profound sense of loneliness. She was encased in luxury, married to a man most women would kill for, and yet she felt utterly, completely alone. Timothy was on his phone, his thumb swiping impatiently through emails. He didn't look at her once. He didn't ask if she was comfortable, if the baby was kicking, if she was excited for the evening. He was already at the gala in his mind, networking charming closing deals between sips of champagne. She and her tent were just the required accessory. The moment they stepped out of the car, the world exploded in a barrage of flashing lights and shouted names. "Timothy, Mr. Davenport, over here." Instantly, Timothy transformed. The cold, dismissive husband vanished, replaced by a smiling, charismatic titan of industry. He wrapped a possessive arm around Letitia's waist, pulling her close. His smile was dazzling, but his fingers dug into her side, a silent command. "Play your part." She smiled, the practiced, gentle smile of Mrs. Timothy Davenport. They posed. He leaned in and whispered his voice, a low, charming murmur for the cameras, but the words were for her alone. "Just try to stand up straight. You look like you're about to give birth on the red carpet." Humiliation, hot and sharp, pricked at her eyes. She fought back tears, focusing on a crack in the pavement just beyond the photographer's feet. She was an object. Her pregnancy wasn't a miracle to him. It was an inconvenience, a temporary disfigurement that marred his perfect picture. Inside the grand ballroom of the Plaza Hotel, the air buzzed with power and money. Crystal chandeliers dripped from the ceiling like frozen waterfalls, casting a golden glow over tables laden with orchids and fine china. Men in tuxedos and women in glittering gowns moved through the room like schools of exotic fish. Timothy was in his element. He steered Letitia towards a group of men, his business rivals and allies. There was Robert Henderson, a grizzled construction magnate, and a younger, slicker developer named Kyle Peterson. "Gentlemen," Timothy boomed, his hand resting heavily on the small of Letitia's back. "You all know my lovely wife, Letitia." They offered polite smiles and murmured greetings. Letitia felt their eyes sweep over her, assessing her dress, her swelling form. She felt large and ungainly, a land creature washed ashore in a sea of mermaids. Kyle Peterson smirked, a glint in his eye. "Starting the next generation of Davenport builders, are we? Timothy, you look glowing." "Letitia." Before she could offer a grateful reply, Timothy chuckled, a sound that was meant to be jovial, but felt like shattering glass to Letitia's ears. "Glowing, yes," he said, leaning in conspiratorially. "And it seems my wife has taken the concept of eating for two as her new design philosophy." A wave of sycophantic laughter rippled through the group. Robert Henderson guffawed, clapping Timothy on the back. "Good one, Davenport, always sharp." The world tilted. The laughter was a physical force pushing the air from Letitia's lungs. He hadn't just thought it, he had said it, out loud. To these men, he had taken her deepest insecurity of the evening and served it up as an amusing anecdote. She looked at him, pleading with her eyes. But he wasn't looking at her. He was basking in the shared joke, one of the guys. In that moment, he wasn't her husband. He was her tormentor. She felt 100 pairs of eyes on her, some sympathetic, most amused. The beautiful, regal queen she had imagined in the mirror was gone. In her place stood a fat, pregnant woman in a green tent, the butt of her own husband's joke. "Excuse me," she whispered, her voice trembling. "I need some air." She turned and fled, not looking back. She didn't see the flicker of annoyance cross Timothy's face before he turned back to his audience, dismissing her with a wave of his hand. "Hormones," he said, and the men nodded knowingly, moving on to the next deal, the next joke, leaving Letitia's shattered dignity behind on the marble floor. The ladies' lounge at the plaza was a sanctuary of soft lighting, plush velvet settees, and antique rose wallpaper. Letitia collapsed onto a small couch in a secluded corner, the dam of her composure finally breaking. Silent, hot tears streamed down her face, splashing onto the emerald satin that now felt like a costume of her own foolishness. Each tear was a testament to 1,000 tiny cuts, 1,000 moments of being made to feel small, inadequate, and unloved. This time was different. This wasn't a private jab in their penthouse. It was a public execution of her self-worth. The door swished open, and Audrey Chen walked in. Audrey was Letitia's opposite in almost every way. A fiercely intelligent corporate lawyer, she was sharp, pragmatic, and wore her designer clothes like armor. She had been Letitia's best friend since their days at Barnard College, and had maintained a thinly veiled suspicion of Timothy from the day they met. "I saw you run out," Audrey said, her voice soft, but laced with an undercurrent of fury. She sat beside Letitia, her sleek black dress a stark contrast to Letitia's voluminous gown. "I heard what that bastard said." Letitia couldn't speak. She just shook her head, a fresh wave of sobs racking her body. Audrey pulled a silk handkerchief from her clutch and handed it to Letitia. "Don't you dare cry over him, Ellie. He's not worth the salt in your tears. He's a narcissistic parasite who gets off on humiliating you because it makes him feel powerful." "He's the father of my child," Letitia choked out the words, tasting like ash. "That's a biological fact, not a character reference," Audrey retorted, her eyes hard. "He did that in front of Henderson and Peterson. He used your pregnancy, the most beautiful thing about you right now, to score cheap points with his Neanderthal friends. That's not a husband. That's a monster." Audrey's words were harsh, but they were a lifeline. For years, Letitia had excused Timothy's behavior, papering over the cracks in their marriage, with justifications and wishful thinking. He was stressed from work. He didn't mean it. It was just his way. Hearing the truth spoken so bluntly by someone she trusted was like a bucket of ice water. After a few minutes of composing herself, Letitia dabbed her eyes. "I want to go home." "Good," Audrey said, standing up. "I'll get your wrap. We can sneak out the side entrance." "No," Letitia said, a flicker of her old, non-confrontational self returning. "I have to tell Timothy." Audrey rolled her eyes, but nodded. "Fine. But I'm coming with you." They found him by the champagne fountain holding court, a triumphant glint in his eye. He saw them approaching and his smile tightened with annoyance. "There you are," he said, his voice low and tight. "Causing a scene, Letitia." "I'm not feeling well, Timothy," she said, her voice surprisingly steady. "I'm going home." He barely looked at her. His eyes were scanning the room, already moving on to his next social target. "Don't be so dramatic. It was a joke. Toughen up. I need you here." "I'm not being dramatic," she insisted, her voice rising slightly. "I am your pregnant wife, and you mocked my body in front of your colleagues. I am going home." For the first time, he gave her his full attention. His steel-colored eyes were glacial. "No, you're not. We are staying until the end. We have a reputation to maintain." "Then you stay," she said, shocking herself with her own audacity. "Audrey is taking me home." He took a step closer, his voice dropping to a menacing whisper. "You will embarrass me over my dead body." "Go fix your face. I'll be networking. I'll see you later. We're going to the after-party at the Baccarat." He turned his back on her before she could respond, dismissing her completely. He walked away, melting back into the crowd, leaving her standing there, stunned and invisible. Audrey grabbed her arm. "That's it. We're leaving. Now." This time, Letitia didn't argue. Audrey led her through a service corridor and out into the cool night air, where the doorman hailed them a taxi. The ride back to the penthouse was a blur. Letitia felt numb, disassociated from the glittering life she was supposed to be living. Back in the sterile perfection of the apartment. Letitia changed out of the emerald dress, folding it carefully, and placing it back in its box, as if it were a relic from another person's life. She put on a simple cotton nightgown and curled up on the sofa, the vast empty space amplifying her loneliness. Audrey made tea and sat with her, the silence between them comfortable and supportive. Around 1 a.m., Audrey, who had been scrolling idly through her phone, suddenly went still. Her expression hardened. "What is it?" Letitia asked, her heart beginning to pound. "That son of a bitch!" Audrey breathed, her knuckles white as she gripped her phone. "That absolute son of a bitch!" She turned the phone towards Letitia. It was an Instagram story from a well-known society blogger, NYC Night Owl. The post was a candid shot tagged at a private suite in the Baccarat Hotel, an exclusive invitation-only after-party for the gala's highest donors. In the photo, Timothy stood laughing, a glass of whiskey in his hand. His arm was wrapped tightly around a woman's waist. But it wasn't just any woman. It was Penelope Moore, a junior vice president at a rival development firm. Penelope was everything Letitia wasn't: sharp, ambitious, and predatory, with a body honed by 1,000 hours at the gym. She was wearing a blood-red backless dress that clung to her like a second skin. Her head was thrown back in laughter, her manicured hand resting possessively on Timothy's chest. They looked like a power couple, perfectly matched in their ruthless ambition and polished glamour. The caption read, "Looks like Timothy Davenport is celebrating his big children's fund pledge in style." Some people have all the fun. #Baccarat, Knights, Power Pair. The air left Letitia's body in a rush. The after-party. He had lied. He wasn't networking for their future. He was celebrating with his mistress. The humiliation at the ball was not an isolated incident. It was a symptom of a much deeper, more rotten disease. He hadn't mocked her because her dress was a tent. He had mocked her because in his eyes she was an obstacle, a frumpy, pregnant burden, standing in the way of the life he really wanted, the life personified by Penelope Moore in her blood-red dress. She stared at the photo, the image burning itself onto her brain. His hand on Penelope's waist, her hand on his chest. Their shared laughter. It was a portrait of a betrayal so profound it stole her breath. She didn't cry this time. A strange, cold calm settled over her. The woman who had fled the ballroom in tears was gone. The woman looking at the phone screen was someone new, someone forged in the fire of public humiliation and private deceit. "I see," she said, her voice devoid of emotion. "I see it all now." She stood up and walked towards the bedroom. Audrey watched her, a worried look on her face. "Ellie, what are you going to do?" Letitia paused at the doorway, her back to her friend. "I'm going to wait for my husband to come home." The wait was agonizing. 2 o'clock became 3, then 4. Finally, just before dawn painted the sky in shades of grey and pink, she heard a key in the lock. Timothy walked in, trying to be quiet. He reeked of whiskey and a floral perfume that wasn't hers. He saw her standing in the living room, silhouetted against the rising sun, and he had the decency to look startled. "Letitia, you're still up," he said, forcing a casual tone as he loosened his bow tie. The after-party went on forever, just schmoozing with investors. "Did you?" she asked, her voice quiet and dangerously calm. "Did you schmooze with investors, Timothy?" Of course, he lied, walking to the bar to pour himself a glass of water. Henderson was there. Peterson. The usual crowd. You should have come. It was important. She held up her phone, the screen still glowing with the image of him and Penelope. Was she an investor, Timothy? He froze his back to her. He slowly turned around, his eyes locking on the phone. The blood drained from his face, his charming facade crumbling to dust. For a moment, there was only the sound of their breathing in the vast, silent apartment. When he finally spoke, the gaslighting and feigned charm were gone, replaced by a chilling coldness. What did you expect, Letitia? He sneered, his voice dripping with contempt. Did you really think this was enough for me? Look at you. You let yourself go. You're emotional, you're needy, and you walk around in these ridiculous maternity clothes. Penelope is a woman. She's smart. She's sexy. She's my equal. The words were more brutal than a physical blow. He wasn't just admitting to the affair. He was justifying it, placing the blame squarely on her shoulders, on the baby growing inside her. Letitia didn't flinch. The coldness inside her had turned to ice. She lowered the phone. Thank you, Timothy, she said, her voice even. Thank you for making everything so perfectly clear. He looked at her, confused by her lack of hysterics. Clear about what? That this woman, she said, gesturing to the opulent apartment, to their life, to him, is over. Timothy laughed, a harsh, incredulous sound. Over. Don't be absurd, Letitia. You're pregnant and emotional. You're not going anywhere. Where would you even go, back to painting your sad little watercolors? You have nothing without me. This apartment, your clothes, your friends. I gave you all of it. His words were meant to cage her, to remind her of her dependence. But in the cold light of dawn, they sounded like a confession of his own design. He hadn't supported her. He had curated her. He hadn't loved her. He had owned her. I may have nothing, Letitia said, her voice resonating with a strength she didn't know she possessed. But I would rather have nothing with my dignity than everything with you. She walked into their vast shared closet, a room larger than most New York studio apartments. Ignoring the rows of designer dresses and handbags, the gilded bars of her cage, she pulled out a single, worn leather suitcase from the back. She packed methodically, not with the frantic energy of a scorned wife, but with the deliberate calm of a woman closing a chapter of her life. She took no jewelry, save for the simple gold locket her grandmother had given her. She packed a few comfortable sweaters, jeans, her sketchbooks, and a small framed photo of her late parents. She left the 5-carat diamond engagement ring and the matching wedding band on the velvet tray of his jewelry box. They were props for a role she would no longer play. Timothy stood in the doorway, watching her, a mixture of fury and disbelief on his face. He was losing control, and it was driving him mad. This is a mistake, Letitia. You'll come crawling back in a week when you realize you can't afford a cup of coffee without my credit card. She zipped the suitcase and walked past him without a word. Audrey was waiting by the door, her car keys in her hand. She gave Timothy a look of pure, unadulterated contempt. I'll be in touch through my lawyer, Letitia said from the doorway. You don't have a lawyer, Timothy scoffed. I do now, Audrey said, putting a protective arm around Letitia. And with that, they left the heavy penthouse door clicking shut behind them, sealing off a decade of Letitia's life. They drove in silence to Audrey's chic, minimalist apartment in Tribeca. It was smaller, but it felt more like a home than the Davenport penthouse ever had. It was filled with books, modern art, and the comforting scent of coffee. Audrey set Letitia up in the guest room, which had a small balcony overlooking the quiet streets. For the first time in hours, Letitia felt safe. The next few days were a blur of numb survival. Timothy's prediction came true with brutal swiftness. The first time Letitia tried to buy groceries, the Platinum American Express card was declined. Her debit card linked to their joint account was also rejected. She logged into her online banking to find the account had been completely drained. Timothy had systematically and efficiently cut her off from the life she had known. He was punishing her, trying to force her back through financial starvation. The humiliation was immense, but it only hardened her resolve. She was sitting on Audrey's sofa, staring at a stack of bills Audrey had insisted on covering, when a memory surfaced. It was from years ago, shortly after her grandfather, a quiet, formidable man named Arthur Pierce Sr., had passed away. He had sat her down in his dusty, book-lined study. "Letitia," he had said, his voice gruff but kind. "You are a Pierce. That means something. This world is full of charming men with sharp teeth. If you ever find yourself in a corner, if you ever need someone who is entirely on your side, you call this man. Don't ask your mother. Don't ask your friends. Call him." He had handed her a thick, cream-colored business card. On it was a name and a number embossed in simple black ink: Arthur Harrison, Esquire. Fiduciary and Estates, Pierce Family Office. She had tucked the card away, thinking it was just her grandfather's old-fashioned way of looking out for her. She had Timothy after all. She was safe. Now the memory felt like a lifeline thrown from the past. She found the card tucked into an old sketchbook. With trembling fingers she dialed the number. A crisp, formal voice answered on the first ring. "Harrison and Associates." "Hello," Letitia said, her voice barely a whisper. I'd like to speak with Mr. Arthur Harrison. My name is Letitia Pierce." "Well, Letitia Davenport now." There was a brief pause on the other end. "Please hold for Mr. Harrison." A moment later, a deep, resonant voice came on the line. "Mrs. Davenport, it has been a long time. Your grandfather was a great man. I have been expecting your call for several years." The next day, Letitia found herself in a wood-paneled office in a pre-war building near the New York Public Library. The air smelled of old paper leather and polish. Arthur Harrison was in his late 70s, with a full head of silver hair, piercing blue eyes, and a suit so perfectly tailored it seemed to be a part of him. He was the embodiment of old money, quiet power, and unshakable discretion. He listened without interruption as Letitia, her voice faltering at times, recounted the events of the past few years. The subtle manipulations, the public humiliation, the affair, the financial lockout. She laid her story bare, expecting pity or worse judgment. Instead, when she was finished, Mr. Harrison simply nodded. "Timothy Davenport, we did a full workup on him when you announced your engagement. Your grandfather was concerned. Mr. Davenport is a classic predator. He finds women of good family but gentle disposition, dazzles them, and then leeches off their social and, if possible, financial capital. His business is leveraged to the hilt. It's a house of cards built on risky loans and the illusion of wealth." Letitia stared at him, stunned. I didn't know." "Your grandfather knew you wouldn't believe him. You were in love," Mr. Harrison said, a flicker of sympathy in his eyes. "So he put safeguards in place. It's time we discussed the Pierce Trust." Letitia had always known her family had money. She received a generous but not extravagant allowance from a small trust that covered her personal expenses. She assumed that was the extent of it. She was wrong. Mr. Harrison opened a thick, leather-bound folder. "Letitia, your family didn't just have money. They built things. shipping real estate manufacturing, generations of it. The Pierce Trust is not a small fund. It's a significant financial entity with assets currently valued at. He paused, peering at her over his spectacles. Just north of 9 figures. Letitia felt the room spin. 9 figures. Hundreds of millions of dollars. What no, that can't be right. My parents lived so simply. My allowance was a deliberate choice by your grandfather, Mr. Harrison explained. He didn't want the money to define you. He wanted you to find your own path, but he also wanted to protect you and his legacy. The trust has several key provisions. Full control of the principal assets would have transferred to you on one of 3 conditions: your 30th birthday, which is still 2 years away, the passing of your mother, who is thankfully still with us, or a 3rd clause. He turned a page, his finger tracing a line of text. It is a morality and preservation clause drafted by your great-grandfather. It states that an heir can petition the trustees for early control of the assets if they can prove their spouse has engaged in behavior that brings disrepute upon the family name or threatens the well-being of a future Pierce heir. Adultery, public humiliation, financial malfeasance. Mr. Davenport has, it seems, hit the trifecta. Letitia's mind reeled. The cage Timothy thought he had locked her in wasn't real. The power she thought he held was an illusion. The whole time she had been the one with the real power, the real wealth, and she hadn't even known it. Furthermore, Mr. Harrison continued, the clause is activated by his actions during the marriage. The moment he cheated, the moment he publicly demeaned you, the mother of his unborn child, a Pierce heir, he essentially signed his own walking papers, and in doing so handed you the keys to your own kingdom. Mr. Harrison closed the folder. We began documenting Mr. Davenport's indiscretions the moment he was photographed with Ms. Moore. We have a team. We have been discreetly building a case. Your call was the final piece we needed. We will file the petition this afternoon. Within a week, we will have emergency access to operational funds for you. Within a month, the Board of Trustees will almost certainly vote to grant you provisional control of the entire trust. He leaned forward, his expression serious. Letitia, your husband, thinks he has left you with nothing. The truth is, he has just given you everything. The question now is, what are you going to do with it? Letitia looked down at her hands resting on her pregnant belly. The baby kicked a small, insistent reminder of the future. The fear and helplessness she had felt for days began to recede, replaced by a nascent, unfamiliar feeling power. Not Timothy's brittle, cruel power, but a deep, foundational strength she was only just beginning to understand. She looked up, meeting the old lawyer's gaze, her own eyes clear and determined. First, she said, her voice steady, I'm going to find a new apartment, and then I'm going to build something of my own. The next few months were a whirlwind of transformation. True to Mr. Harrison's word, the legal and financial mechanisms of the Pierce Trust moved with startling efficiency. Within days, a new bank account, accessible only by Letitia, was established, with a balance that made her dizzy. She moved out of Audrey's guest room and into a sun-drenched duplex apartment in a historic brownstone in Brooklyn Heights, a neighborhood that felt a world away from the cold glass tower she'd shared with Timothy. The space had character-exposed brick, a small garden, and a large, airy room that was perfect for an art studio. For the first time in a decade, Letitia felt like she could breathe. Guided by Arthur Harrison and a team of shrewd but kindly financial advisors she began the daunting process of understanding her own legacy. She learned about stock portfolios, real estate holdings that dwarfed Timothy's entire company, and philanthropic arms of the trust that had been quietly changing lives for generations. It was overwhelming, But with each meeting, her confidence grew. She was no longer just Letitia, the artist. She was Letitia Pierce, the steward of a legacy and the future mother of the next in line. Timothy, meanwhile, was spiraling. He had been served with divorce papers that made no claim on his assets, a move that baffled and infuriated him. He had expected a fight, a tearful plea for reconciliation, a demand for alimony. He got serene silence. He called her, his tone shifting from saccharine sweetness. "Ellie, darling, I miss you. This is all a misunderstanding," to sputtering rage. "You'll regret this. You'll come back with nothing." She never answered. All communication was routed through Mr. Harrison's office, a wall of impenetrable legal formality. His affair with Penelope Moore became public, a messy footnote in the gossip columns. They were spotted at all the fashionable restaurants, Penelope clinging to his arm, wearing the victory like a new fur coat. But behind the scenes, Timothy's world was beginning to crumble. He had been counting on a friendly divorce settlement from Letitia, or at the very least, continued access to the social standing her family name provided. He was also expecting to tap into what he believed was her modest inheritance to secure a massive line of credit for a risky new skyscraper project. Davenport Tower, his monument to himself. His bankers, who had been promised a future infusion of Pierce family money, were getting nervous. They started calling in markers and tightening the terms of his existing loans. The house of cards Mr. Harrison had described began to wobble. Letitia, insulated from all this, focused on her future. The humiliation of the charity ball had left a deep mark, but she was determined to turn that pain into purpose. She remembered the feeling of being pregnant and wanting to feel beautiful only to be made to feel like a tent. She thought of all the other women experiencing the miracle of pregnancy while navigating a world that often treated their changing bodies as an inconvenience. An idea began to form. With her artistic eye and newfound financial independence, she could create something Timothy would never understand, a business built on empathy. She incorporated a new company, Anya Pierce Designs, named for her unborn daughter. Her mission was to create a line of luxury maternity wear that was elegant, comfortable, and empowering. It would not be about hiding the bump, but celebrating it. The fabrics would be sustainable, the labor practices ethical, everything the Pierce family legacy stood for. She hired a small team of talented young designers and pattern makers, setting up a workshop in the burgeoning garment district. Her days were filled with purpose. She approved sketches, felt fabric swatches, and oversaw the creation of her first collection. She named each piece after a strong woman in history, the Marie, after Curie, the Rosa, after Parks, the Frida, after Carlo. The brand was a direct refutation of everything Timothy represented. It wasn't about image. It was about substance. It wasn't about tearing women down. It was about building them up. As her belly grew, so did her company. Audrey handled the legal contracts, her sharp mind, a perfect complement to Letitia's creative vision. Mr. Harrison provided sage advice from the background, clearly delighted with his client's initiative. The first major twist came not from the divorce courts, but from Mr. Harrison's private investigators. They had been digging into Timothy's business practices as a matter of due diligence. What they found was far worse than just risky loans. Mr. Harrison summoned Letitia to his office. His face was grim. "Letitia," he began, "it seems Mr. Davenport's ambition far outstripped his ethics. In his application for the financing of his new tower, he didn't just allude to your family's wealth, he actively used it." He slid a document across the desk. It was a loan application to a consortium of international banks. "He submitted forged documents," Mr. Harrison explained, his voice low. He had a forger create what looked like official statements from the Pierce Trust, pledging a significant portion of its assets as collateral for his loan. He essentially told the banks that your family was backing his project. It was brazen fraud on a massive scale. Letitia stared at the forged signature of a trustee, a man she'd had dinner with last week. The audacity of it was breathtaking. Timothy hadn't just been counting on her money. He had been actively stealing the promise of it. The banks approved the initial funding based on these forgeries, Mr. Harrison continued. He's already broken ground. But now that we've initiated the divorce and cordoned off the trust's assets, the banks are doing their own deep dive. They have contacted us. They know the collateral doesn't exist. It's only a matter of time before they contact the district attorney. Timothy wasn't just facing a messy divorce and a business failure. He was facing federal charges, bank fraud, forgery. His entire empire, his very freedom, was about to be annihilated. And then came the second, more personal twist. An anonymous email arrived in Audrey's inbox. It was from a junior secretary at Davenport Properties, a young woman who had witnessed too much. The email contained copies of internal communications between Timothy and Penelope Moore. They weren't love letters. They were strategy documents. Penelope wasn't just a mistress. She was a co-conspirator. The emails revealed a calculated plan. Penelope had targeted Timothy knowing his business was vulnerable. Her goal was to encourage him to leave Letitia help him secure the fraudulent loan. And then, once the project was underway, use her knowledge of his fraud to blackmail him into giving her a controlling interest in the new tower. The public affair, the mockery of Letitia, it was all part of the plan to isolate Timothy from his wife's stabilizing influence and push him toward more reckless behavior. Penelope hadn't been his partner in passion. She had been his partner in crime, with her own knife ready to plunge into his back. She was playing him the entire time, Audrey said, scrolling through the damning evidence. He thought he was the predator, but he was her prey. Letitia felt a strange, detached pity for the man who had caused her so much pain. He had built his life on using people, and in the end, he was being brought down by someone who had simply played his own game better. His cruelty to Letitia wasn't just a byproduct of his affair. It was a tactic encouraged by his mistress to push Letitia away, so they could execute their fraudulent scheme. The humiliation she felt at the ball suddenly clicked into place with horrifying clarity. It hadn't been a spontaneous, cruel joke. It had been a calculated move, likely planned with Penelope, designed to make Letitia feel so worthless. She wouldn't question his late nights, his secretive behavior, his after-parties. She placed a hand on her belly, where Anya was now a constant rolling presence. Her daughter would be born into a world free of his poison. She would be born a Pierce, the heir to an empire built on integrity, not deceit. "It's time to launch the collection," Letitia said to Audrey, a new fire in her eyes. "Let's plan an event, something beautiful, something the whole city will be talking about." She wasn't just building a company anymore. She was building her coronation. The launch of Anya Pierce Designs was not merely an event. It was a statement. Letitia, channeling the formidable business acumen that lay dormant in her DNA, had chosen the glass conservatory at the Brooklyn Botanic Garden. On a crisp September evening, under a sky studded with the first stars, the space was a breathtaking paradox, a lush, tropical Eden, thriving in the heart of the concrete metropolis. Thousands of tiny, twinkling lights were woven through the canopy of fiddle-leaf figs and Kentia palms, their reflections dancing on the glass walls. The air was thick and sweet, with the scent of night-blooming jasmine and hundreds of white roses that lined a runway of polished slate. A string quartet played softly in a corner, their music a silken thread weaving through the excited, appreciative hum of the city's most influential voices. This was a world away from the stuffy, judgmental ballroom of the plaza. This was a world of her own creation. Letitia stood near the entrance, a serene anchor in the swirling current of fashion editors, buyers from Bergdorf's and Neiman Marcus, and bloggers whose posts could make or break a brand overnight. At nearly 9 months pregnant, she was the living embodiment of her company's ethos. She wore the Letitia, a masterpiece from her own collection. It was a gown of midnight blue silk, so fluid it seemed spun from moonlight, cascading from her shoulders and flowing over her body in a way that was both majestic and profoundly gentle. Her baby bump was not an accessory or an obstacle. It was the radiant center of her silhouette. She was not a queen from a forgotten era. She was the matriarch of a new one. Audrey, sleek and sharp in a black architectural dress, stood beside her, a proud, protective glint in her eyes. "You did it, Elle," she murmured, squeezing her friend's hand. "You actually did it." Letitia smiled, a genuine, deep smile that reached her eyes. "We did it." She felt a lifetime away from the woman who had cried in the ladies' lounge. The emerald tent was a ghost, a memory of a skin she had shed. Tonight, she was not an accessory to a powerful man. She was the power. When the show began, a hush fell over the conservatory. The first model emerged, bathed in a soft spotlight. She was gloriously pregnant, her skin glowing, wearing a tailored cream-colored coat dress that was the epitome of chic professionalism. She was followed by a diverse procession of women, tall, petite women of every color, all in different stages of pregnancy. They wore elegant cashmere sweaters, sharply cut trousers with ingenious expanding waistbands, and evening gowns that shimmered and flowed, celebrating every new curve. It was a runway of life, of strength, of unabashed femininity. The collection was a love letter to women, and the audience felt it. The initial polite applause grew into a wave of genuine enthusiasm. As the final model, wearing a breathtaking blush-pink gown, completed her walk, the entire room rose to its feet. The applause was thunderous, echoing off the glass ceiling. Audrey nudged her gently. "Your turn." Letitia took a deep breath and walked onto the runway. The flashbulbs were a blinding storm, but this time they didn't make her flinch. She felt their light as a validation and embrace. She placed a hand on her belly, a gesture of both pride and protection, and bowed her head in gratitude. In that moment of pure triumph, a profound sense of peace washed over her. She had taken the ugliest chapter of her life and spun it into this golden, beautiful thing. It was then, as her eyes scanned the sea of cheering faces, that she saw him. The sight was so jarring, it felt like a tear in the fabric of her perfect evening. Timothy was standing at the back of the conservatory, a spectre at the feast. The atmosphere around him was a vacuum. The crowd had instinctively parted their whispers like the rustling of dry leaves. He was a man utterly out of place. His impeccably tailored suit, once his armor, now hung on him, rumpled and ill-fitting. His face was ashen, his hair disheveled, and his eyes, those once commanding steel eyes, were wide and frantic with a terror she had never seen there before. The business journals and gossip sites had been merciless. Davenport Properties on the brink of collapse. Fraud allegations swirl around real estate titan. He was no longer a king. He was a pariah, and he had come to the site of her coronation as a final desperate gambit. 2 security guards in subtle dark suits began to move towards him. But Letitia, with a slight, almost imperceptible shake of her head, stopped them. This was a confrontation she had to face herself. This was the final ghost to exorcise. She stepped off the stage, her midnight blue gown flowing around her, and moved towards him. The crowd watched in rapt silence as she closed the distance. He looked like a shipwrecked sailor who had just washed ashore, stunned by the light of a world that had moved on without him. He waited until she was only a few feet away. "Letitia!" He rasped, his voice a dry crackle. He tried to muster a shadow of his old charm, but it was a grotesque parody. "You look magnificent." "Timothy," she replied, her own voice a calm, clear pool he could not stir. "You shouldn't be here." "I had to see you," he said, taking a clumsy step forward. His desperation began to bleed through his composure. "Ellie, they're going to indict me. The banks, the DA. They've frozen everything. It was all a mistake, a misunderstanding. A business deal that went sideways. A business deal built on forgery, Timothy. On my family's name," she asked, not with anger, but with a quiet, piercing clarity. He flinched, the truth of her words hitting him. He abandoned all pretense, and his voice dropped into a desperate, pleading whisper. "We can fix this. I know we can. You and me." He reached for her arm, his touch shockingly cold. "The Pierce Trust. If you just talk to Harrison, tell the trustees to back the loan to make it legitimate, it will all go away. We can say it was a family investment. Please, Ellie, we can be a family. For the baby." He gestured to her belly, the same belly he had allowed Penelope to mock the child he had deemed an inconvenience. He was trying to use their daughter as his final bargaining chip. Letitia looked down at his trembling hand on her arm, then back to his terrified face. In his eyes, she saw no remorse, no flicker of love or regret for the pain he had caused. She saw only the raw animal fear of a cornered predator. He wasn't sorry for what he did. He was simply terrified of the consequences. Gently but firmly, she removed his hand from her arm. "There is no we, Timothy," she said, her voice soft but absolute. "You burned that bridge with gasoline, and you celebrated the blaze with your mistress, and you will not dare to use my daughter as a shield to protect you from the mess you created." His desperation curdled into a familiar, ugly rage. "You did this," he hissed, his voice rising, drawing gasps from the onlookers. "This is your revenge, isn't it? You and that senile old lawyer, you set me up. After everything I gave you, I made you who you are." A small, sad, and deeply pitying smile touched Letitia's lips. The delusion, the narcissism, it was all that was left of him. "No, Timothy, you're wrong. You didn't make me," she said, her voice resonating with the quiet power of a hard-won truth. "You just revealed me to myself. For 10 years I thought my value was in being your wife. I lived in your shadow, making myself smaller, so you could feel big." She paused, her gaze sweeping over the beautiful space she had created. "You called my dress a tent that night. But you were the tent, Timothy. A hollow, empty structure beautifully decorated on the outside, but with nothing of substance inside. And I was the one living within it, too afraid to step out into the sun." She met his gaze, her own eyes clear and free of hatred. "So thank you, truly. Without your cruelty, I never would have been forced to find my own strength. Without your betrayal, I never would have discovered what I was capable of building on my own." He stared at her, utterly defeated. The words were a judgment he couldn't refute. He seemed to shrink, the last of his blustering rage deflating, leaving behind a pathetic, broken man. It was at that precise moment of silence that the polite hum of the party was decisively broken. Two uniformed NYPD officers, their presence stark and official amidst the high fashion, entered the conservatory. They were accompanied by a grim-faced detective in a dark suit who moved with unshakable purpose. They walked directly to Timothy. "Timothy Davenport," the detective asked, his voice calm, but carrying an authority that filled the vast room. "You're under arrest for bank fraud and conspiracy to commit fraud." As the officers efficiently cuffed his hands behind his back, a collective gasp went through the crowd. Phones were raised, their flashes now documenting not a fashion triumph, but a spectacular fall from grace. As they led him away, Timothy's head swiveled, his eyes locking with Letitia's one last time. He was searching for something triumph, anger. But he found nothing. Her expression was one of serene finality, the calm after a long and terrible storm. This was not her victory over him. It was simply her victory. From the corner of her eye, Letitia saw a flash of movement. It was Penelope Moore who had been watching from the shadows. Her face was a mask of cold, furious calculation. Seeing the handcuffs, she turned without a moment's hesitation and slipped out a side exit, vanishing into the Brooklyn night. A text from Audrey buzzed a minute later, a simple, damning message. "The DA's office just confirmed. Penelope Moore is their star witness. Full immunity. The final betrayal, as clinical as a business transaction, was complete." 2 weeks later, Letitia was in a quiet, private suite at Lenox Hill Hospital, the city lights twinkling like a distant galaxy outside her window. The chaos of that night felt a lifetime away. All the headlines, the bankruptcy filings, the salacious details of Timothy's plea deal, she had tuned it all out, focusing only on this final sacred waiting. And now she was here. In her arms, swaddled in a soft cream-colored cashmere blanket from her own infant line, was Anya Rose Pierce. She was impossibly small and absolutely perfect, with a full head of downy dark hair and eyes that, when they opened, were the same deep, thoughtful blue as her mother's. Audrey sat in a plush armchair by the window, scrolling through her tablet. "Well," she announced with quiet satisfaction, "it's official. Davenport Properties assets are being liquidated. Timothy took the plea 7-10 in a federal facility, and Anya Pierce Designs just got a 6-page feature in the upcoming issue of Vogue. They're calling you the face of a new, more empathetic era in fashion." Letitia barely heard her. Her entire universe had contracted to the tiny, perfect being in her arms. She traced the delicate shell of Anya's ear, her heart swelling with a love so fierce and vast it felt like it could power the entire city outside. All the pain, the public humiliation, the profound betrayal. It hadn't been a detour. It had been the path, the agonizing, fiery path that had led her right here to this moment, to this child. She hadn't just survived. She had created life both in this beautiful baby and in the new woman she had become. Anya stirred her tiny hand, unfurling and wrapping trustingly around Letitia's finger. Letitia looked down at her daughter and understood with piercing clarity the true nature of her inheritance. It wasn't the 9-figure trust or the real estate portfolio. It was the unyielding resilience in her blood, the quiet strength of the Pierce women who had come before her, and the fierce, unconditional world-building love she felt for the little girl in her arms. She was free, and her life, her real life, was just beginning. Letitia's story is a powerful reminder that our lowest moments can become the foundation for our greatest triumphs. Betrayal and heartbreak can feel like the end of the world. But sometimes They are the violent, necessary catalyst for discovering our true worth. She transformed from a victim in a gilded cage to the architect of her own empire, not with revenge, but with resilience, creativity, and the courage to build something beautiful from the rubble of a broken life. Her journey proves that the ultimate power isn't held by those who tear others down, but by those who have the strength to rebuild themselves. What would you have done in Letitia's shoes? Have you ever had a moment that forced you to find a strength you never knew you had? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Like this video. If you were cheering for Letitia's comeback, share it with someone who needs to hear this message of empowerment. And don't forget to subscribe for more stories of justice and resilience.